Okay, so to negotiate or not to negotiate? This seems to be the big question in DC this week when it comes to the looming deadline for Congress to vote to increase the debt ceiling and avoid having the United States default on its loans for the first time in its history. Last week, U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen announced that the Treasury Department was taking extraordinary measures to ensure that the full faith and credit of the United States government was preserved and that the nation did not default on its debt. She also announced that if Congress fails to increase its debt ceiling, currently at $31.4 trillion, by early June, that our country would have no choice but to default. This would inevitably hurtle the world into a global financial crisis. It would assure that our country would enter a very severe recession, and it would be the first time in the history of the United States that the full faith and credit of our government would prove meaningless. Now, given Republican reluctance to lift the debt ceiling without guaranteed spending reductions, the stage is set for another tense, high-stakes showdown with the Biden administration where failure to reach a deal will be catastrophic for the entire world. So with that background, last Friday, the White House announced that it would not negotiate with Speaker McCarthy or GOP Republicans over raising the debt ceiling. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said, quote,
"The president has been very clear about where we stand on the position of default. Really very clear. I've said it. The president has said it. It is something that has been repeated when you think about dealing with the debt limit. When you think about what Congress has been able to do the last 3 times with the last administration, and it's a responsibility that they have. It is a basic responsibility that Congress has to deal with the debt ceiling."
Last Friday evening, the White House released another statement saying, quote, "Congress has always done it, and the president expects them to do their duty once again. That is not negotiable," unquote. So, given the stakes, is the Biden's White House refusal to negotiate crazy or reckless? Today, I'm going to unpack the thinking around the president's refusal to negotiate with the GOP on raising the debt ceiling. I'll share my views of its wisdom or folly, and I'm going to offer some guidance for you on how to decide whether and when to negotiate at all. So let me describe what I think the president means when he says he won't negotiate with House Republicans. I think specifically what he's saying is, I'm not going to sit down with Kevin McCarthy in some formal way where the White House will offer some concessions in exchange for the Republicans' agreement to lift the debt ceiling. That is about all that I think he is saying. And to the degree that that is what he is saying, I think the president is making a wise decision here. Well, why do I think that? I think there's a few reasons. First of all, if you're going to enter into a negotiation, you want to do it in a situation where there is some history and suggestion that the other side is entering in good faith. And given the Obama administration's experience with negotiations on the debt ceiling in the past, there is no evidence for this. But we don't need to look to the past. We could also look to the present. At this point, Republicans are saying things like, well, we need to see reductions in spending, that when asked, they have nothing specific to offer. Critically, they have failed to give any Yesable proposition to Biden. In other words, they haven't said anything like, if you do X and Y, then we will raise the debt ceiling. And so entering into a negotiation where the past suggests that saying yes is a moving target, where there have been no specific requests, and where there is not a history of good faith bargaining, seems like a fool's errand. Add to this fact that often gets lost, which is during the administration of President Trump, Congress raised the debt ceiling 3 times. In fact, even though Republicans say they're interested in balancing the budget or fiscal restraint, the reality is that during the Trump administration is when nearly 25% of America's current debt was accrued. Now, another reason to not negotiate with the Republicans here is that we in fact know that the far right of the Republicans in the House have indicated that they are prepared to be total spoilers on this negotiation. They have said that they will not vote to lift the debt ceiling. And negotiating with Kevin McCarthy in this case would be a real mistake. Why is that the case? Because McCarthy has not demonstrated that he can control this wing of his party. So you might say, okay, well, but Kevin McCarthy is a Speaker of the House. No doubt he could bring other Republicans on board. And I think that is absolutely true. But here's the problem. In the negotiations that led to him getting elected Speaker of the House, he granted to the far right an ability to call a snap vote on his own speakership with a single member of the House requesting it. So what that means is that if McCarthy reaches a deal that makes anyone in the House, including the far right, unhappy, they can call a snap vote on his standing as a speaker. And there's nothing from my experience to suggest they won't do this. Moreover, what we know about McCarthy is that he cares more about being speaker than just about anything else. And so the reality is that even if it made sense to have a negotiation, the formal negotiation with Speaker McCarthy is the wrong person because he simply has not demonstrated that he can deliver his constituency or is willing to sacrifice himself in order to do that. So that's formal negotiation. But let me now make a really big distinction here because I want to go back to the definition of negotiation that I use all the time whenever I teach it, and any of you who've been watching this channel have heard. And that definition is that a negotiation is any communication between two or more persons with an intention to influence or to persuade. And I want to suggest that under this definition of negotiation, not only will the White House negotiate, the White House has been negotiating, the White House will need to negotiate. So let's talk a little bit about the actual negotiation strategy that the White House seems to have adopted. First, they have begun a very strong messaging campaign over and over that if the United States defaults, the nation and the world will hurtle into a deep recession and the US dollar will no longer be the global currency of choice. Now, why are they doing this? They are doing this in an attempt to influence or persuade. Are they trying to influence or persuade Republican congresspeople? Probably a little bit. But you know who they're really trying to persuade? The average citizen, people like you and me. And why are they doing this? Right? They know that if they can claim this story and persuade enough people that it is reckless to not raise the debt ceiling, then those people will start to put pressure on their Republican congresspeople, and that will then influence those Republican congresspeople to raise the debt ceiling. In negotiation, we call this strategy sequencing to build coalitions by looking at patterns of deference. Okay, that is a mouthful, but let me explain, right? What we're saying here is because Republicans do not defer to the White House, the White House has to figure out to whom will these Republicans defer. And one constituency that they will defer to is their own voters. Now, do their voters defer to the White House? Not usually. But if you could spin a story in a credible way to show those voters just how catastrophic default on the debt will be, then you will motivate enough of them to start to actually influence their congresspeople. So it's an incredibly wise and important strategy. And, oh, by the way, it is negotiating. Second, the administration is also doing all it can to remind the American people that raising the debt ceiling now has nothing to do with future spending. In fact, raising the debt ceiling now is just allowing us to pay the people from whom we have already borrowed money. So they're also making basic appeals to justice and law and order, the kinds of things that tend to appeal to the average citizen. What is the second way in which the administration is likely to do some negotiating? Well, while they might not sit down in formal negotiations with the Republicans, there's no doubt that they will use Democrats in the House and in the Senate to put pressure on moderate Republicans, reasonable people, people who understand the financial world, to get those Republicans to do whatever they can to influence legislators within their own caucus. The final strategy that the White House is no doubt using is deputizing proxies in the Senate and in the House to do some negotiation on their behalf, and specifically in the Senate. There's no doubt that Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has been tasked to work with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell in some way to get a Yesable proposition out of the Senate. And if that happens, then McConnell will be charged with pressuring McCarthy in the House to get enough Republicans on board to avert disaster. So to say that there is no negotiation going on is not true. In fact, negotiation is happening all over the place here, but in this kind of highly formalized way where the president sits down with McCarthy to negotiate concessions. That, I think, is the thing that the White House is saying, we're not doing that. Let me just say a few more things before I wrap up. First, in general, there should always be a presumption for negotiation. I think negotiation is the way to resolve most disputes. But in a situation where there is very low trust, where the other side has not shown itself to be credible, where there is no sense that there is anything yesable that you can offer them, where they will continue to be a moving target, those reasons may caution you from actually negotiating. Even in those situations, however, we should always agree to meet with the other side, to listen to them, and to learn from them. So when people say, I won't negotiate, I always want to say to them, if what you mean is sit in some kind of formalized conversations where you are offering concessions in exchange for concessions from them, fair enough. If what you mean is I won't sit down, I won't have a conversation, and I won't listen, that is foolhardy. So lastly, right, as we think about whether to proceed in negotiation, we need to think about what are the consequences of no agreement? What are what we call our BATNA, our best alternative to a negotiated agreement? And at least at this point, the White House has decided not that their BATNA is better, because the BATNA of no agreement is truly calamity for the United States and the world, but their BATNA in terms of deciding whether to negotiate with McCarthy right now, they see as pretty good. They see the wisdom of the American people and the reasonableness of some people in the Senate and in the House on a person-to-person basis using proxies as the way to get this forward. Now, it's a real mystery to see what's going to happen. I certainly hope for the good of the country that this strategy works. Only time will tell. If you are interested in continuing your own journey on deciding when and whether to negotiate and when or whether to walk away, stay tuned and watch this next video, which is when should you not negotiate at all? Okay, thanks for watching. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit like, and ring the bell so you'll never miss new content. Okay, you know you want to learn when to negotiate and when to walk away. Click, click, click.